Greta Marie's diary, 1st of 2378. It is so good to be back. The journey was okay because the ship is able to self-pilot after I programmed in the coordinates. I just allowed myself to disconnect completely. I snoozed for maybe 10 hours, I think. Well, I left early in the morning, and when I woke up, horribly hazy, it had darkened outside the windows. Some of the older people in town say that it is bad luck for a new year to start just in the middle of a dark night. For all our sakes, I hope that that is only superstition. For if things go any worse, what can we even do? I intend to stay home until the next light day begins, so I suppose I'll get over a week here still. It makes me uneasy to leave Lillian alone for so long, but I do have confidence that she can make it through even without my help. She told me that the Duke was going to host a lavish New Year's celebration, and that of course she'd also been invited. When I tried to needle out of her whether she would go as well, she was vague. I could tell that she wanted to, for the servant boy, of course. I suppose it was a choice with reward and punishment. Go to the party, likely have fun, and even encounter the cute boy you like. But on the other hand, the Duke would be there, and would probably refuse to leave you alone. If I was in her position, I maybe would go, and ensure that the Duke gave up his intentions by planting a good fist on his face. I do understand that because of the rules of her society, Lillian could never do this, but the image is a good one still. Well, I myself left just in time to arrive here for New Year's. Although I was exhausted after my trip and everything that has been going on, it was wonderful to be with my family again, my community. We had the best food we could acquire, and I had to chide myself when I compared it to the one I get at Keaton. Of course it doesn't compare. We green gardeners live underground, making do with whatever scraps we find and those few plants that we've managed to get to grow underground. I was actually taken to see the farm before our dinner, despite my protests. It was Aliana, my cousin, who dragged me there at Mother's insistence. I had fallen asleep again, although Aliana woke me up after only 4 hours, perhaps. Apparently everyone was needed to prepare, and so I went, wobbly as I was. Despite my exhaustion, I was impressed. The farm has nearly tripled since the last time I was here. We've some carrots, potatoes, and tomatoes. Also grapes, which account for the amount of wine, and some rather small but still enjoyable lettuce. A few different types of berries as well. Aliana, alongside other green gardeners, has developed fake solar light shields, which shine steadily on the farm. They're powered by a watermill on the surface of our hideout. It has been camouflaged as to not attract attention, and so far it has worked well. Aliana did tell me the poor news that the river appeared to be drying up, however. An expedition party had followed it up to its origin, and of course, like everything else that is ruining Illyria, a rot was there. It was growing in moss and vines, choking the initial water spring. There have been efforts to try and stop the spread by building walls out of metal and taking out the rot, but it persists. I have zero doubts that this is the same one that is everywhere, even if it is a different variant. I'll go have a look at it as well before I go back home. Perhaps it will illuminate the research I have been doing. If only I could have brought something from the love-knot vine, or even some of the elixir. It is far too much under supervision, however, and I would have been caught for stealing even the smallest amount of it. Thus, all that I can do is try to stop the spreading somewhat until I do get the chance to find a cure. While doing this in the spring is a very small in scale, it is what we should be doing across the moon. Well, it is what we have been trying to do for years now. I managed to stay up for most of our New Year's celebrations, though while by the end my eyes were still open, I was not taking in anything that anyone was saying to me. Thus my mother finally allowed me to go to sleep. And sleep I did, longer than I have in years. I was so deep in my slumber that I did not even awaken when my mother detached my arm in order to take it to the mechs for fixing. She had also plugged in my head to recharge my eye. An immense hunger is what woke me up finally, and I was yanked nearly back to sleep by the cord tied to my head. After unplugging myself and testing out my eye, it was once again working at its best state. I got down from my bedroom on the top floor. Ever since I had cybernetic parts built into my head, I have preferred not to go too far underground, as my brain starts getting fuzzy. Everyone else had awakened as well, despite me being the first one to go to sleep. Thankfully, some food remained, and after eating maybe a tad too much, I went to see the mechs about my arm. They had restored it and were now wondering what new attributes to build into it. Given that these mechs, also distant cousins of mine or something, are well renowned for both skill and their pranks, I snatched my arm and ran away shouting thanks. I will decide what to add to my limbs, I think. The flamethrower idea is still rumbling around my head, though testing that underground would be a hazardous situation. I do think that more tools will be useful, especially once I get back and deal with Malbot again. If everything is going according to plan, he should be far easier to manipulate upon my return. For now, I shall relish in the last few days I have here, and continue to rest and heal. I have of course imparted all that I have learned since the last time I was here, which hopefully will be useful to my family. Greta Marie's Diary, 17th of 2378. I am currently on the outskirts of town, deep inside of a building so deteriorated that it barely resembles one anymore, at least upon its surface, where weather and time have trimmed it down. We had to dig down to find an entrance, and I used one of my newest tools that I did manage to attach back home. The laser saw was difficult to work out, especially as it kept threatening to overheat. In truth, I still worry that it will sometimes. Maybe one day I'll awaken to my arm burning down. So far, at least, it has not. Ideally, I'll someday be able to get rid of it, knowing that I won't have any use for it. Right now, however, it is essential indeed. Once we'd found the roof, or one of the floors, rather, of the building, I cut a hole with my laser and we slipped inside, into air so musty that our visions could barely tell nothing apart. We lit our torches, which highlighted the particles floating in the air even more. I am grateful that our helmets obscure most smells, as I cannot even begin to imagine how horrendous the scents down here must be. The ground beneath our feet did not feel stable, and indeed, as we kept going, several patches of the floor fell down. Thankfully, both me and Vivi are quick on our feet due to our respective trainings. It is odd to think how completely my perception of her has changed in mere hours. I approached her earlier today after her visit with Lillian, which had gone well. The two were locked in the Love Knot greenhouse for almost the entirety of the day, and I nearly became desperate given that Vivi, or Kieran as I still thought of her at that point, would have to rush home. Thankfully, they did come out of there eventually. Apparently, Lillian had begun developing a headache. Upon going to sleep, I gave her an extra dose of her sleeping draught, for the headache, and also so that she'll wake later. I don't know how long we're going to take here, and getting back home will also take at least 3 hours. Well, I managed to grab hold of Kieran again, and he told me that he'd been able to locate a spot of strange rod activity not too far from town. Also, he revealed to me some truths about himself as well. Well, herself. In us both being undercover and hiding our true selves, we found that it was easy to be honest with each other. Apparently, she has been hiding her true identity ever since arriving here, as she knew or learned about the secondary position of women in Illyria. I cannot blame her, though this makes Lillian's feelings for her far more complicated. It is not unheard of in Arinon for two women to be together, or even marry should they acquire special permission, but for an heiress who specifically requires a gentleman in order to keep hold of her property, it would be disastrous for her and everyone else at Keaton Estate, including me. I cannot afford to lose my position, especially given how close we are to a breakthrough. So while I would not wish to be cruel and separate two in love, I did hint to Vivi, that she should reject Lillian, more powerfully than she has until now. Not that I think that the Countess should marry the Duke either, as I am certain that at some point she'll encounter someone better, or finally be allowed to rule her own estate. I'm getting sidetracked now. After revealing herself to me, Vivi also showed me a map she'd drawn up, pinpointing to the location she thought would be interesting for us to look into. We met up during the night and took one of the abandoned spare ships held in a storage hut at the edge of Keaton. It had rusted a lot, and getting it to actually work took some time. Hopefully not too much, but we managed to get it going. I drove while Vivi gave me directions based on her map. It was hard to chat during the drive, the wind being so loud, and also as we were wearing helmets. I did manage to catch that apparently she is a cartographer originally at her corporation. Also, she told me that in truth she hadn't gone to Illyria on purpose, rather she had crash-landed after her original ship was attacked. We were quiet for a long time after that, or else she wasn't speaking loudly enough for me to hear. I put the pieces together myself about what likely happened, especially knowing that her brother was probably on that ship as well. After a 3-hour ride, we made it to this spot, dug our way in and all that. The first level of the building, the first underground level, had nothing of interest besides it being nearly completely deteriorated. Eventually, we found an elevator, which had completely jammed. So we got through its floor and carefully climbed down to the next level of the building. When looking down the chasm of the elevator, only darkness met our eyes, so it was impossible to tell how far down this goes. Once we get back, both Vivi and I will try to find any info of this building in the archives of Illyria. I am nearly certain that this was a research facility, but for what and how long ago is difficult to know. Based on its abandoned and decrepit state, I would say ages ago, but the rot likely sped up the environment here. The second level was in slightly better shape, though not by much. And in an odd way, I should note, after coming down a few more floors, each one feeling more stable than the last. Me and Vivi have developed some theories. While the original state of the building remains in its base, its bare constructs, the reason each lower floor feels more stable is because of the rotting environment. Vines have grown to support walls, the floors have been covered by spongy moss, which when trying to cut through requires considerable force and sharpness. Furniture has been taken over by the vines and vegetation of the rot as well. Everything is green. The air becomes denser each level as well, nearly feeling like water, where I am currently. I am covered in sweat beneath my suit, and my legs and arms ache due to the effort of making our way around here. On the third floor, we found rooms which more clearly indicated the likelihood that this building was once a scientific facility. Some locked cupboards, their doors so tightly locked that they had actually blocked some of the rot, held glass equipment for measuring and cooking. Thankfully, I have an excellent lockpick installed in my arm, so once the locks were demolished, it was easy to open any cupboards and boxes and whatnot. We haven't had to worry about the doors, as most were the sliding glass type, once operated by electronic touchpads. The doors themselves are either lightly jammed and easy to push open, or completely gone, and the touchpads, which we uncovered by scraping off layers of vines and moss, are completely unusable. The next 3 levels had what we classified as test rooms, empty and containing what once may have been tables, chairs, beds, and other furniture. As I've already stated, most were in a barely recognizable state. Thankfully, there still was even the barest hint of what once was, so we could write down some notes. It was when we got to the 7th floor that we found something truly interesting. Well, first of all, it was the final floor of the elevator. Given how dark it was everywhere, the drop looked longer than it actually was, and the 7th floor wasn't like the others. Vivi had been mapping in a notebook the layout of this building, and the floors all had more or less the same one. A perfect square within which were rooms and corridors. The 7th one, however, was one long hallway, each end extending too far for our torches to light the way. Thus we made the hopefully not foolish choice to separate and each go in our own ends of the corridor. I took north and she took south. Since then I have been recording this and going forward. So far I have found nothing, only this endless corridor. I am beginning to lose hope here. The walls are completely made up of vines, moss, the rot. The ground feels spongier than ever. Perhaps I have found where the building ends, and instead am walking in a naturally constructed tunnel deep underground. It is so dark, and when I look back, I cannot even see where I came from. In some ways, this reminds me of our underground living spaces, although we do ensure that everywhere is well lit. At the back of my mind is also a nagging voice warning me about what we could encounter down here. Illyria is generally not dangerous, its creatures small and peaceful. Us humans are the more dangerous inhabitants here, but so far down, who knows? No one in decades has dug so deep into the ground of Illyria. Except for whoever built these facilities, of course. Given how extensive they are, I have no doubt that they were someone of wealth. Too much wealth, even if for the sake of science. It cannot be good or natural to disrupt the moon so much. And now, when something has gone wrong, those people are nowhere to be found to help fix things. It is left to us, those with only our lives and homes to gain from it. I have checked my watch, and we have barely 4 hours before morning comes. I shall head back, and then find Vivi and tell her we should get out of here. Maybe we'll have to return, try to go even deeper. Or hopefully, she has actually found something of interest. Greta Marie's Diary, 19th of 2378. I have needed 2 days to recover from our escape and actually process what happened. Somehow we've managed to keep our midnight trip hidden from everyone else. Or at least everyone here at Keaton Estate. I assume the same goes for the Duke's Palace, though I haven't seen Vivi since that day. While she and Lillian had scheduled a date for today, we received a letter from the palace stating that Vivi was otherwise engaged there. Hopefully she is well, and this isn't a cover for something worse. I'd like to think that, as it also stated that she should be able to come in 2 days. Lillian was, of course, heartbroken, and has been moping in her room all day, refusing to go anywhere else. I've had to bring up all her meals and do her hair twice, as she keeps undoing it in her misery. For now she has managed to fall asleep, giving me a moment of respite finally. When I returned towards Vivi in the tunnel, at first nothing much happened. I was getting bored due to the long walk back, and my body was nearing utter exhaustion. I was also hungry and thirsty, and we had left all our food and water on the ship. Once I finally reached the spot where the elevator shaft was, I called for Vivi. She didn't answer, however, so I slowly began walking in her direction, continuously calling for her name. I did this for a few minutes until finally I heard something else. Stopping in my tracks, I listened to a distant rumbling sound. Soon, increasingly loud footsteps also joined the soundscape of the tunnel, and finally from the darkness began to emerge Vivi's lamp. She was running towards me as quickly as she could. Her shouting was barely comprehensible, but I got the gist of what she wanted me to do. Without thinking too much, I began to climb up the elevator. While a surge of adrenaline had suddenly taken over my body, I was still exhausted, and already on the 6th floor I was trembling and could barely hold on. Below me, Vivi had just started to climb as well, her eyes shining wildly inside her helmet. I tried to ask her what it was, who was following her, but she ignored me, determined to get out of the facility quickly. Pushing myself even more, I managed to make it up 2 more floors before I nearly fell down. Clinging to the railing, I looked below me, where Vivi had already reached the 5th floor. Despite not being that physically impressive, she had clearly trained well back at her home planet. And underneath her, in the darkness, something was gleaming. Well, 2 somethings, eyes without a doubt. The being's form was impossible to tell apart because of the darkness, but it appeared to have stopped, unsure of where we were. I tried to signal to Vivi what we should stop and stay quiet, that perhaps the way it would ignore and move. I tried to signal to Vivi that we should stop and stay quiet, that perhaps that way it would ignore us and move on. Thankfully she understood, and despite my muscles screaming at me to relax, I stayed exactly where I was. At least my breathing could even out a bit, and even my heart stopped hammering in my ears. I adjusted my eye to see better in the darkness, and an image began to form before me. Well, below. It was at least 8 feet tall, I suspected, though from above it was hard to tell. Completely made up of a dark green outer layer upon which were entangled vines and a leathery yet flaking skin. It was standing on 2 legs, and yet it resembled an animal far more than a human. On its head, 2 massive horns expanded out, and as it tried to look up the elevator shaft, they hit the railing, and it yelped, backing away. It was in that moment that I got a better look at its front legs as well. Or its arms. They were made up of the same surface as the rest of its body, but they ended in a strange form. They were hooves, but with 3 talons extending from the stone-like surface. Quickly turning back to look at its head, a horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. It did not look like one specific animal that we knew about. It looked like many of them, crudely mixed together for something horrible to be born. A goat with some elements of a hawk and some from a mountain lion. All that and the rot, together and terrifying. After clearing out of its daze, the creature tried to once again shove its way into the elevator shaft. Thankfully, it once more failed to do so. While I felt a shot of relief, I was still mostly horrified, and began to climb up, Vivi following me. We had to take breaks on the 3rd and 2nd floors, and despite being a cyborg and having 1 mechanical arm, Vivi ended up helping me get further up. By the time we reached the surface, I was waddling on, Vivi's arm helping me stay up. Well, at that point both of us were probably helping each other. On the ship, we got the motor going thankfully quicker than when leaving, and we took turns driving, so both of us could eat, drink, and rest. The journey back was completely silent, and even through all the dirt that Vivi's helmet had acquired, I could tell that she looked ashen. When we got back to Keaton Estate, we hid the ship back where we found it, and did our best to get rid of at least some of the dirt on our suits. Already I could see a gardener milling about the estate, and while Lillian was perhaps still asleep, the other people may not have been, especially those 2 annoying sirs. At least my way back was quick. Vivi had to walk all the way to the palace. I helped her to the hidden exit we had used before as well. I suspect no one else here knows about it, as I was only able to find it due to my mechanical eye. It is a gate built into the bubble that covers everything on the estate, accessible by pressing the skin print of one of the owners of the estate onto the invisible keypad. I have been using one of Master Will's old gloves to pass through, and so far it has worked every time. Before passing through, Vivi handed me a small bundle. From it emanated a rank smell, and I was tempted to give it back to her, but she quickly spoke before disappearing out of the estate. Apparently she had found a massive space, not a room of the facility, but more of a cave which was nearly alive, and she managed to take some small pieces of evidence before that creature appeared and began to chase her. As I made my way back to the manor, I considered her words, and it came to me what she likely also suspected. Could that cavern be where the rot is spreading from? Its point of origin? And more than that, if we were able to neutralize this cave, or heal it somewhat, would this help save Illyria? These thoughts nearly made me dizzy with how hopeful they seemed, and it took nearly an hour during which I prepared Lillian's breakfast and cleaned myself and dressed normally before my mind reached another conclusion. We have only the barest idea of what could be a cure for the rot, the love-knot vine in one small green room. There is no way for it to be enough to cleanse the entire cave. And how would we even go about destroying it? Fire? Ice? Caving it in? I must have been in quite a stupor due to my thoughts, as when Lillian finally woke up, she had to call my name twice before I got on to her being in the room. I gave her the excuse of a poor night's sleep, and she was sympathetic, and actually gave me a far less stressful day for the rest of it. The following day was largely uneventful, apart from mine and the Sir's check-up of the Malbot. Well, it appeared on its own, singing and yellow. Lillian was upstairs in her room, resting, and after desperately looking for her and not finding her, the robot scuttled off, dejected. The reprogramming seems to have worked, so perhaps tomorrow, as Vivi hasn't returned yet, I will try to get something out of it. What love does to people is indeed ravaging, I should say. I am not certain if Vivi herself has even realized how deeply she has knit herself with everyone here. While I am not an expert, I can say with certainty that she has a deep fondness for the Duke and the Countess both. How that will turn out for her, I cannot even fathom.